Hi everyone, Patricia Worby, Alchemy Therapies here, and it's another in my ongoing series of conversations around radical healing. And today I'm delighted to introduce my new friend and colleague, Helen Davis, who is the founder of Blended Therapy. Now, Helen, you describe yourself as a hypnotherapist and yoga teacher, which is a wonderful combination. And I just want to know, how did you come to actually decide these were two things you wanted to specialize in?
Hi, Patricia. It's lovely to be here. So for me, it was never a decision. It was something of that. Hypnotherapy and yoga were two things that helped me put my life back together when everything had completely fallen apart.
Yeah.
I'd had a long 20-year career in business. I was a successful business analyst. I got chronic fatigue and the carpet was pulled out from under my feet, and hypnotherapy and yoga were the two key things that helped me. It wasn't even find myself again, it was find myself for the first time, work out who I am, what I wanted to do, what I'm here for. And it sounds like they're two very different things, but to me hypnotherapy and yoga are absolutely two sides of the same coin. They're both about helping people to integrate the different parts of themselves that have come into conflict, that they've lost touch with. They're both about connecting mind and body. With yoga, that's a very obvious connection, that we are using our body to find a way to still the mind, and by being in the body. And it's important to mention that the type of yoga I do, which is known as Scaravelli inspired, is very gentle, it's very internal. I always say to my students, people look through the window, it looks as if we're not doing anything half the time, but it's hard work. And the longer you do it, the harder work it becomes. But the hypnotherapy to me as well is also about the mind-body connection, because of course what we think in our mind, what we imagine, manifests in our bodies, in our lives. And so I'm particularly interested in hypnotherapy with a health slant, and helping people with health conditions of any kind, including preparing for surgery, but also people who are struggling with fatigue conditions of any kind.
Yeah, I agree with you. I totally agree with you that they're two sides of the same coin. I think that's a lovely way of putting it, because so often illness is looked at from either the physical perspective or the mental perspective, you know. We have a health system that usually channels us in the physical first and says, right, we'll fix the symptom. And then if we can't fix the symptom, then you need psychological, mental health therapy, you know. And we sort of, it's either or, isn't it? It's never both.
Absolutely.
And I have somebody I spoke to this morning who, you know, she's been seeing her GP for depression. At no point has the GP asked her, what is going on in your life right now? You know, or what has happened to you recently to change things for you? What, you know, because this is a really important question. The mind and the body are in communication, as we know. So I absolutely love that and I love you've called it blended therapy, the combination. I think it's inspired, actually, a really good way of describing it. So I wanted to touch on your CFS ME journey, as we like to call it, even though actually at the time it just feels like hell, doesn't it? You know, we can all say, well, we've been through it and we've learned so much and it's been very powerful. But at the time, when we're in the really difficult phase of having all the symptoms, it can be like the worst thing that's ever happened to you. So tell me about yours.
So yes, as I said, I'd been working for 20 years in a career that I was good at, I was successful at. With hindsight, that was pretty much the only reason I was still doing it, because everyone kept telling me I was good at it, so I didn't know what else I could have done with my life. Again, with hindsight, over the previous few years, so we're going back 7 years, it was early 2012.
Okay.
Over the previous years, I'd started getting throat infections every winter. I'd started realizing that my health wasn't as good as it could have been. I worked from home, although I worked for a big corporation. I went into London one day a week, but I worked from a home office, which actually was, at that point, became a negative, because it meant that I could hide the fact that when I got an email that I was upset by, I could go and have a cry and come back to my desk and no one noticed.
Yeah.
And that's what was going on. My mental health was spiraling down, my physical health was spiraling, but I just was completely oblivious to the fact. And then I got a flu-like virus, which I didn't manage to shake off. And a week later, I thought I was over it, or should be over it. Took the dog for a walk, came home, and thought I just need to go to bed for a bit. And I remember it absolutely vividly. My then husband had actually just gone away on a very long business trip, hence me having to walk the dog.
Yeah.
And I was lying in bed. I woke up in the middle of a Saturday afternoon in tears. And I remember lying in bed saying aloud, I just can't do this anymore. I just can't do it anymore. And I didn't even know what I was referring to. And I picked up the phone, I rang my mother, who lived 10 minutes drive away, and said help, which was totally out of character for me. And her first question was, can you get yourself here? And I said, no. And she had to drive and pick me up. And when she arrived, I was wandering around the house in a daze, not knowing what to do, what to take.
Yeah.
Well, beyond the dog food, I couldn't even imagine what I needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I can resonate. My story's not dissimilar, although it happened a bit longer ago, but in the wrong career, in a career that you can be good at, but isn't right for you, a crash, usually a trigger to the crash. In my case, I'm trying to remember in what sequence, but I think it was I was just exhausted. And I remember I had to do a show, and I was planning the show, and then I just collapsed. So a bit like you. I can remember making a similar phone call. Actually, it was to my sister-in-law, funnily enough, because she, poor woman, had the misfortune to ring me and me say, I think I'm going mad. I think that's what I told her. And because I was so anxious, I was physically exhausted, but also really, really anxious in my mind, And she said, ring your mum. And I actually had to go back and be nursed by my mother. And I don't know if that was the same for you, but I basically had to be brought round. Yeah.
My husband at the time was away for 6 weeks, so I was on my own.
Wow.
And I spent the whole of that time with my mother. And in the first, I can't remember how long it was, but initially I was in bed for 23 hours a day. I've always been a huge bookworm. I didn't read a book for 6 months.
Yeah.
I would literally make my way downstairs to eat my supper downstairs with her and my stepfather, to do something different. I couldn't listen to the radio for more than about 15 minutes at a time. And I slept a huge amount. Again, you know what it's like, but equally there was a lot of the time it wasn't even sleeping. It was just that sort of suspended animation thing. Yeah. It's interesting what you said about a trigger as well, because a couple of months before it happened, maybe 3 or 4 months actually, I'd done my biggest work trip to date. I'd been speaking at conferences, which wasn't unusual for me, and doing client presentations. And I'd had some very negative feedback from a very senior client about the one part of, about a presentation I'd given, which was the one thing I felt, I had huge imposter syndrome, but that was the one thing I thought I could do. And it totally poleaxed me. And I had support. All my colleagues, including my upline, as it were saying it's rubbish, but it
hit you hard.
Yeah. And that, I think, was the point at which everything just went, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, because it's not what happens to us, it's the meaning we make of what happens to us, isn't it?
And I've always, one of my traits has always been that I'm been a real people pleaser and approval seeker, and therefore I take criticism very, very hard. And that's one of the things I'm really still working very hard on doing, because it's so easy to feel given worth by people's approval, but you can't do that without also giving credence to their disapproval or their criticism. And so learning to not care what people think about you
Mm.
in, and being able to find that worth inside oneself, as for me, has been a huge part of this process. And obviously that's ongoing. I wouldn't say I'm there yet.
Yeah. I still struggle with criticism. I think it's part of the sensitivity story, you know, that CFSME tends to strike people who are highly sensitive, but they then tend to go into careers which don't support that sensitivity because they're also quite driven and A-type. So we have the iceberg model in the teaching that I follow, which is Chrysalis effect. We talk about the iceberg. So at the top is I'm fine, yeah. I'm coping, I'm brilliant at this, you know, I know what I'm doing. Underneath there's all this doubt, there's all this over analysis of your worth and your, you know, who you are, and you're struggling with the extra sensitivity that you've kind of always had, but you've never really understood, and you've never supported, and you've not known how to support it. And then there are, you know, your childhood experiences, adverse childhood experience, some people call them ACEs, family dynamics. You know, you mentioned your then husband, so I'm assuming
the marriage didn't survive the illness.
No. Oh, okay. So you know, a great loss and a great sadness. And so this trajectory, you've mentioned so many important things for people to understand, I think, is that the sound sensitivity and the inability to focus on anything and all you want to do is sleep is absolutely classic textbook CFSME. It's a response of the mind and body, isn't it, to shut down anything that is not related to pure survival.
Yes, and that complete brain fog that you just can't, you can't get hold of anything, you can't focus.
And the harder you try, the further it goes, isn't it? I mean, you had that. So I would wake up determined, today's going to be different. I'm going to try and get out of bed, or I'm going to try and focus on one thing. And I'd manage about 20 minutes, and then I'd be like, my brain would just shut down and I'd have to go back to bed, and that was it. It's horrible.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I was going to say that for me was that I never experienced before was the physiological feeling. It felt like as if my limbs were completely disconnected, and that's if I've really overdone things now, that sense that my body is kind of disconnecting, that my limbs are nothing to do with what's going on here. And it was that that was what for me epitomized the. And for me, I know a lot of people had, you know, differences about what words work for them and don't work for them. For me, fatigue has been a good word because it's not a word I ever used before. So for me, fatigue describes this complete inability to move.
Yeah, it's not just tiredness, is it? It's a
different thing.
It's a totally different thing. And unless you've been through it, folks, if you're listening, and I know there's a lot of people out there who think, well, just get over it. That is the basis of graded exercise therapy, actually, which is the standard approach, is that you've become deconditioned and you just need to try harder. And actually, fatigue is a totally different thing. This is a metabolic physiological response to overwhelm and accumulated stress over the life course. And the mitochondria, which control your energy output, are basically going into what we call the cell danger response. And as I've said, they shut down anything that is not related to pure survival. So brain fog, and, you know, an inability to actually move yourself, your body. And the thing about the limbs and that is so interesting. For me, my weird symptom was that my hands were twice the size. Okay, so I would have this impression that my hands were massive. Like, back in the 70s, there was a comedian called Kenny Everett, and he used to do a TV show with these massive latex hands, which he used. That's how my hands felt, massive and disconnected. And what I now understand, I think this is correct, but the neurology of that is the part of the brain that controls your spatial awareness of your limbs, which I think is linked to the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex. I believe that's right. Is part of the brain system that sort of shuts down because it's not considered absolutely essential. And so you get these weird awarenesses that feel really frightening, don't they? To feel disconnected from your body is totally out there. And I can remember being really freaked by that and thinking, right, I really am losing it. And the fear, of course, then drives further symptoms and no answers in the current medical system, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I was incredibly lucky because I had a really supportive GP.
That's good. Wow.
I was very, very lucky. And she wasn't actually my GP beforehand. I was with a group. I've also had migraines, chronic migraines since I was 21. Before I got ill, they were, I mean, chronic doesn't even, I was taking triptans for those, which for those who don't know, are not a painkiller. They actually contract the muscle, the brains, nerves in the head, which expand. So they're very powerful drugs. And I was taking those, I used to take half a dose at a time, but I was taking half a dose 5 to 8 times a week.
So
I was in a complete cycle because they are known to create rebound headaches. So I was in a cycle of dependency. On those without realizing. So I went to my doctor quite regularly for those. But when I got to the point that I was able to get out of bed and get to the GP, but anyway, I saw a different doctor, and she stuck with me all the way through, and she was my doctor until I had literally moved out of the area, which the only thing about it was I had to move away from her. And I remember right at the beginning when we'd gone, we've ruled out everything they rule out, and so we were left with
CFSME.
ME, fibromyalgia, whichever one the doctor picks on, depending on your symptoms that day, in my opinion. And she looked me in the eye and she said, I promise you, you will get better.
Oh my God.
Tell you when, but you will get better. And having subsequently gone on to train as a hypnotherapist, I understand the power of those words.
You are so lucky.
I really was. I have been incredibly lucky on so many levels with all of this. People that have come onto my radar have been amazing.
Well, sometimes we're supported, by the bigger picture. I don't know whether you have a spiritual belief or a religious belief, but I think you've been brought to this, is my feeling from what you've been saying. But that you had a GP like that, I did not have that experience, but we are talking 17 years ago, and the awareness was a lot less, and the GPs then tended to think either you were faking it for whatever weird reason you would do that, because no A-type driven personality wants to be on benefits. We just are not that kind of person. We're not seeking attention, actually. We're often quite introverted, sensitive people who put ourselves out there, but we're not attention seekers. We're not the kind of person that would go on reality TV or, we just would go, oh, no. So that doesn't make sense. Or the other explanation was that, you just had got exhausted and you needed drugs to help suppress the symptoms. And I ended up on a cocktail of sleeping tablets, antidepressants, first of all Prozac, then amitriptyline, I think it was, which just made me feel like a complete zombie. Didn't help my sleep. God knows, I really remember. It was just a cocktail of things. And looking at myself in the mirror one day, and my pupils were massive, right, because I was so drugged up. And just looking at myself and thinking, you look like a druggie. Because I'd grown up with a bit of that. I witnessed it in my family, and my brother, who got a bit into drugs when he was in his late teens. I was revolted by that. I was like, I don't want that for myself, because that disgusts me, that I've ended up, a licensed druggie, if you like. And it's not helping. It wasn't actually solving the issue, because I think the issue is often, going back to where we started, it's a mind-body issue. It's an emotional block, something you're not dealing with in the life, or many things that have happened that you're not dealing with emotionally and not allowing yourself to resolve them. And at that point, I think I made the decision to come off the drugs. And everybody tells you, don't do it cold turkey, don't do it. I did, of course, because I'm an A-type. So I just came off them all, and then I started looking for alternatives. And then I found various things that I would have run a mile from up to that point, acupuncture, massage. I know I was quite body phobic, so to have someone touch my body was extraordinary, and to think, actually, this feels really good. Then other things followed. So it's interesting, isn't it, how we get led to this answer, this new solution. So for you, what was the breakthrough? Did you have one?
I think one thing which end in terms of what happened, but actually was important, was that from the migraine point of view, I was referred to a neurologist. And I went to see this guy, and he basically looked down my family history and all the rest of it, and he went, "Oh, well, they're hereditary. You can't do anything about it." And then he said, there's lots of different drugs that have been found to help with migraine. I think you should work your way through those. And I tried beta blockers years before, and my dose had gone up and up and up with no apparent. So I was like, don't want to do that. And I'd always known I didn't want to be taking drugs every day for something that wasn't happening. It just felt wrong. And I tried amitriptyline, and it turned me into a complete zombie.
Like me.
And I think it may have been one of the triggers, because it was a few months prior, and it had no notable effect. And I said, "Oh, well, I've tried a couple of things, and I don't really want to use that approach." And he said, "You've hardly tried anything." He said, "We've got a long list." He said, "I suggest you start with this one. It's actually an epilepsy drug, but some people find it helpful with migraines." And I just literally burst into tears. I mean, my mother was sitting in the car park waiting for me, because I was unable to drive or anything at that point. And I just knew this was wrong. So that probably primed me. And then a Bowen therapist, who is somebody, it's a family friend, who I'd always been too busy to go and see her, because she wasn't very near where I lived. She did one treatment with me and said, "Your jaw is a big problem. You've got TMJ,
causing tightness at the back."
That's connected to the migraine, all the rest of it. She said, "If you can, I would suggest you go and see this dentist in London, who I've heard talk at conferences. He is an absolute expert in TMJ." I went to see him. He's no longer practicing. He's retired now, but I went to see him, and he referred me. He said in the first session, he said, "Yes, I can help with your jaw." But given that I had to, it was a huge undertaking to get to London, and I dissolved into tears about 3 times in the 20-minute consultation. And he said, "I could certainly help, but we've got to get a handle on this fatigue first, before we do anything." And he said, I work with 3 complementary therapists. I only work with them because I believe they're all outstanding in their field. There's a hypnotherapist, an osteopath, and a kinesiologist. And I would recommend, if you're open to it, that you go and see the hypnotherapist and the osteopath. And I did. I am still in touch with both of them. I still see the osteopath on a monthly basis. The hypnotherapist, we ended up becoming friends, which you're not really meant to do, but we did.
Sometimes.
It happens, exactly. We're still in contact. In fact, she'll probably watch this when it goes online. The 2 of them helped me totally change my worldview, opened me up to all of that weird stuff, to the belief that there is a bigger picture, that and I felt I had no choice. I mean, people have said to me that it was amazing how I took on all the changes that were presented to me, but I genuinely felt I had no choice. And I know that not everybody gets to that point or at that place, but I just felt I had no choice. I think the other thing that's important, because I was married, but I don't have children, and my career, even though deep down I knew it wasn't the right one, totally defined me. So when that was taken away, I didn't know who I was anymore. I had no idea. And so I literally had to rebuild from the bottom up. And work I did, and again, traditionally, typically hypnotherapy is and can be a short-term way of working with people. I worked with Sharon for years, because each time we worked with something, there was more to deal with. It wasn't that, you know, everything worked, but it was an ongoing process, because each time we got somewhere, and it was way more than hypnotherapy as well. We did a lot of work together. And then and what was amazing was having the dentist, the hypnotherapist, the osteopath, the three of them all knew each other. They all had my permission to talk about me as and when it was appropriate. So it was a complete holistic approach, and on every level.
Yeah. So beautiful segue into what I wanted to cover. So my journey, not so team-based as yours, unfortunately. Wish it had been. But, you know, we are now looking at this model of different therapies combining to help a person to integrate, exactly what you said, integration, to reintegrate, and not just to recreate the you that you were, because obviously the you that you were was not in alignment with your real self, but to recreate yourself in alignment with who you really are. And to that end, you know, you've got to have people that understand this mind-body approach, this holistic model. And I know that you asked me about the Chrysalis effect before we started recording, and actually the two features that I find so interesting about the Chrysalis effect, which is an online program for people with CFSME fibromyalgia, but it is also supported by practitioners, and it offers training for practitioners as well. The two features that are absolutely distinct with this model are team-based working, number one. So a client will not just come and see one person, you know, ad infinitum, open-ended. It's a very structured approach which takes them through a series of different understandings and learnings and supports them both mentally and physically, and you basically work as a collaborative team. So you pick the people that you think will work best with this person, and one person oversees that and sort of brings in people as and when are needed. And it just is phenomenal when you've got several different approaches working to the same end, which is to help this person discover who they really are, release the blocks and the old beliefs that are hindering them, and teach them a new way. It's also totally holistic, of course, because it's looking at things not from the point of view of symptom suppression or management, but at root cause medicine, which is such a buzzword at the moment. But it's looking upstream, not downstream, you know. Migraines, for instance, classic example. I suffered with migraines ever since I hit puberty, so 14, 15. Classic example of liver congestion, okay? It is, yes, to do with obviously the vessels at the back of the neck, but the reason that the body does that is because the liver isn't able to filter all the excess hormones. So, and stress creates cortisol, which creates excess hormones in the blood. So the liver is already congested. So as soon as you add in the sex hormones at puberty for a woman, this is why women tend to have more migraines than men, you get that problem. Nobody ever explained that to me. In fact, the last
I've never heard it put that clearly before either.
Oh, okay. No, well, this is my understanding now. I've done the research. I've looked it up. I've found the answers. It makes perfect sense. It explains it for me. You know, I was under a lot of stress at that point in my life as well, being, you know, a girl trying to make it in science, you know, being very driven myself, internally driven, but very sensitive as well. So, yeah, struggled. They used to make me vomit. I used to have migraines so bad every month. I would have two, and I would vomit, and I'd have to go to bed in the dark, curtains drawn. I asked so many people, I looked it up, they just said migraines are still not really understood. This is the NHS current, as far as I know, still not understood. You're like the doctor said to you, hereditary. Well, hereditary, not exactly. What is hereditary is the liver functioning, which is an epigenetic effect of poor detoxification, okay? And yes, my mother suffers from it too, so you could say it's hereditary. But there are things you can do, there are interventions you can make. So when you understand how everything is linked together, that this is a systemic problem and that the symptoms you're suffering, be it migraines, anxiety, fatigue, it doesn't matter. There is a root cause that is at the core of all that. So, you know, this approach that you're following is absolutely in chime with what I do, I think. And that's what struck me when we spoke, actually, was, this is someone I need to talk to. So it's just so wonderful to hear it. And we're going to probably draw to a close for this one. I know I'm going to talk with you again, but just to say to people out there, and I hope you'll agree, there is solution out there. You don't have to suffer these modern 21st century complaints, you know, anxiety, depression, fatigue. You can do things which help your body to heal. The body is an amazing healing organism when it's given the right information. So
Absolutely. And one of the things I always say in yoga is that we're making space, because the body needs space to heal, and it works for the mind as well. So sometimes that complete coming to a halt is needed to give the space to create the healing. But it is happening because the healing wants to start.
I love that. I'm going to use that. I have always said you have to break down to break through. Like you have to come to the end of your coping mechanisms, right? Because like you said, you were overworking, you were pretending everything was all right when it wasn't, you know, when you were really hurt by how the criticism you'd received. And for me, it was having to keep pushing myself to be a saleswoman when I'm not a saleswoman. You know, my previous career was garden design, which I'm passionate about the environment. I'm passionate about growing and living landscapes. And I thought, this will be great for me. It'll be a great career, you know, but it isn't all about being creative. It's a large part of it is about selling. And the selling angle for me was desperate. You know, when I would go in and you'd have to offer a free consult to people, and then they would have a lineup of 5 or 6 people coming in after you. It was just like the worst experience for me, you know, because then the pressure's on, isn't it, to be exceptional or, and I can't do social connection. I can't do creativity when I'm under pressure, because obviously that's not how we're in our flow, are we? So that was the problem for me. And then having to do that, the show I mentioned, you know, where I would just be on show, literally promoting my work was just the trigger for me. It was just a bit like what you said, I can't do this anymore. I think that's probably my internal dialogue. And so the crash, the breakdown, the end game is your wake-up call, and it is your chance to heal. It is sad we have to learn from that point, isn't it? But here we are. We both did it.
Yeah, and I know I wouldn't have done it otherwise. I say I know. I can't see how I would have got off those train tracks.
No, because it's intense, isn't it, when you're in.
And I had no belief that there was any other career I could do. I couldn't see outside my little focus.
Yeah.
Because I was so afraid of expanding because of the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I know how to do this, but that is too scary.
Yeah.
I couldn't see what my transferable skills were, as they say.
No.
It was just that I couldn't see how I would ever get off unless I suddenly had a windfall that meant I didn't have to work.
Yeah. I think actually your story and my story aren't dissimilar. I think for me, I didn't mention, but my relationship had broken down. Mine was just before. And I was living in rented accommodation. Actually, I was a lodger because I couldn't afford to rent a place on my own. So I was somebody's lodger, you know. I was 34, I think. It was desperate, and convincing myself, I've got to keep going, I've got to do this job because I can't think of anything else. It's absolutely right. And it wasn't till I hit bottom and couldn't even get out of bed that I had to change. I had to find a new way. And here I am, a therapist like you, so far from where I started. I could never have conceived of this life that I live now. No, I don't want to give people the impression it was easy, because it wasn't. It wasn't. But
no, it's not easy. And I have, you know, and I also want to make it clear that I still have to pace myself.
yeah,
I still have to be careful.
yes,
And actually, in a bizarre way, I now see my migraines as a blessing, because they are what they kick in when I'm overdoing it.
yeah,
And without that, my personality, I would be quite likely to push myself until the point when I go back to bed for a few weeks, which I know a lot of people find happens to them.
yeah, yeah,
I get a migraine, and these days I very, very seldom take any drugs for it. I survive. I go through it.
yeah,
They're less bad than they used to be, but
yeah.
they are my reminder that I'm overdoing it and I have to step back a bit. But I completely believe and know that that process is ongoing, and there will come a point when I'll wake up one day and go, oh, A, I haven't had a migraine in I can't remember how long, and B, I would have expected to have needed to stop after doing all that, and I haven't.
Yeah,
And it's a gradual process, but there is absolutely life out the other side.
Yeah, 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 absolutely concur with that. I'm not saying you recover and then you can just do what you always did. You actually have to learn to listen to your body.
Yes.
And the migraines for me were the early warning signal that I ignored. And, you know, we talk about taking the warning light out and going, oh, no, it's fine. You know, we just not look at the early warning light. But then the breakdown is inevitable, because the body is telling you this is a problem and I need you to listen. So,
and actually, we all need to listen to our bodies. So
yeah, we do.
I'm just thinking, hearing what we're both saying,
Yeah.
if coming out the other side is, but I still need to listen to my body, then actually we all need to do that anyway. So that who's to say that's not 100% recovery, but just with more awareness.
More awareness, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's another angle to this, is that the lives our bodies are adapted to are not the lives we're living.
Yeah.
You know, we would have been in a tribe. We would have had occasional life threat, but not ongoing chronic stress of deadlines and fear messages in the media and, you know, nuclear Armageddon or eco Armageddon. You know, this is a very different life to the one our bodies are adapted to. So I think we just have to be more mindful of our limitations, but also our inner guidance, and start to tune in. And that's kind of where I'm at as well. I know I can't push myself. I've limited, for instance, the hours I work, and I'm really clear about that with everyone. You know, I won't just fill in as I would have done before. You know, you want to come and see me? Yeah, go, you know, come on in. It's like, no, I work these hours, and outside of that, I no longer, you know, I have to have downtime. I have to preserve that. Loads of other things I do to help keep my health. So here we are. Wonderful story. I'm so glad you came out the other side. Because you know, we wouldn't have had this conversation. So it's so amazing. I'm looking forward to talking with you again. So I'm going to say au revoir for now, and thank you so much for, you know, giving me your time and your story. It's
thank you for inviting me. It's been wonderful. It's been really good.
Okay, all right. So bye for now, folks.
Bye.